Okay, Prynawn da pawb. Chroeso, good afternoon everyone and welcome to this multi-location meeting of the Environment, Regeneration and Street Scene Services Scrutiny Committee on the 4th of November 2024. I'm Councillor Sean Person, I'll be chairing the meeting today. As usual, members and officers present, could you please ensure that your phones are on silent during the meeting? And if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. We have members and officers in the chamber and on Teams today for the meeting. So just for clarity and purpose of declarations, we'll be scrutinising items 3A, 3B, 9A and 9B from the Cabinet Forward Work Programme. And there's a small change to the order of the agenda as well, just to ease the progress of the meeting today. We have two private items. We'll be taking item 9B, Reola Estate first. Then we'll move to item 9A, the Viva Talbot bid renewal ballot. We'll take that last because we'll be coming out of private session to deal with the vote and recommendations on that item. It just saves us going in and out of private during the meeting. So I'll now move on to the declarations of interest, agenda item 2. Are there any declarations of interest, please?
Oh, Councillor Hurley, Chair.
Councillor Hurley?
Yeah, hi Chair. I've got a conflict with Reola, so I'll drop out when you're discussing that.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other declarations?
I see no other declarations, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll now move on to consider items from the Cabinet Forward Work Programme, which is item 3 on the agenda. So we'll go to item 3A, which is the budget report on pages 5 to 11 of our agenda pack today. We've got quite a lot of items on this budget report, and I believe we'll be moving through these line by line during the scrutiny session. I think officers are going to give a brief overview of the item before we go to questions from members. So if we go to page 5 of our agenda packs, we start with ENVA, which is SAB and Highway Development Control. I'm not sure, Dave, are you taking that?
Yes, I take that item. Yes, this relates to some small fees that will be added to SAB assessments that's undertaken by the team. Things like responding to solicitors' letters. There'd be a small fee introduced for responding to those letters, and a small increase in fees and charges to deal with the actual section 278 and 38 agreements. But overall, it's very nominal in its approach. It's been benchmarked against other local authorities as well.
Thanks for that. We didn't have any indications in pre-briefing for questions on this one. Do members have any questions? I can see Councillor Carol Clement-Williams. Carol? I'm not sure if you're speaking, Carol, but we can't hear you in the chamber.
Sorry, my computer's running like a slug, Chair. Sorry, I'm clicking on the mic, but it's taking its time coming up.
We can hear you now, Carol. Do you want to go ahead with your question?
Yeah, I can't see myself either, but my camera is on. I don't know if you can see me. Anyway, yeah, sorry I couldn't make the pre-briefing. Yeah, just in these it says increase in fees and charges, and then there's and it's not. Just this one. So just wondering why the figures aren't in there. That's just.
Sorry, Carol, we lost you. We lost you in the middle of your question there. Could you just repeat it for us, please? Thank you.
Oh, sorry, my signal must be off. I don't know what's wrong with my machine. So basically, why aren't the fees that they're considering putting in? They've calculated a figure, so they've calculated on something. So why aren't the workings out on that? You hear me, Chair?
Yeah, we're just clarifying this.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Dave, do you want to try and take this question?
I'm sorry, Chair, I'm not certain that I've got the breakdown of the 11,000, but it's from, they are small fees because there are multiple applications. So they are very, very small increases across the portfolio.
Nicola.
What we tried to do is, and I perhaps what I intended to do before we went to head of service is try to indicate that we have focused on areas which will have the least impact in terms of the budget savings that we've come up with, because we found it very difficult this year to actually achieve the target. We've all been, as directors, we've all been given a target of 5%. And as you'll appreciate, over the years, we've made cuts in all the sort of low-hanging fruit. There's no medium-hanging or low-hanging fruit left anymore, which is why we've had to go to make some difficult decisions in terms of proposals, which you'll obviously come on to shortly. But what we have done is we've benchmarked all fees and charges where we are increasing them against neighbouring authorities to try and ensure we're still broadly in line with other neighbouring authorities, so we're not an outlier. Albeit we can provide a list of the fees and charges individually to scrutiny members or any members after the meeting if they want that level of detail. But the sum of money we're raising is fairly small. It's only £11,000 for all of this, the fees and charges that Dave is applying within his service area.
Can I come back a second?
Yeah, of course you can, Carol.
I'll keep
Go
my
ahead.
camera off because I think it's interfering with my signal. So I'm not necessarily saying I'm against it. I'm just saying if the figures are there, it would be helpful if they were in the report, because very often people come up to us off the street and go, oh, they've introduced a figure for this now, and it's handy if you can come back and say, oh, but it's this, it's only this, or it's that much. Just it would be interesting to see what the figures are. But you know, it's not there. It's not there. So.
Thanks, Carl. As Nicola said, I'm sure we can have some details circulated after the meeting on that one.
Yeah, just to add to that, then, Chair, I can provide that breakdown of figures. But it is, the fees are going to be going on for the vetting of the technical approval drawings for the highway and drainage adoptions. And there is a small fee increase on inspection fees, physical inspection fees on site for works up to the value of 15k in total value. So as I say, they are some quite small increases, really.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on now to ENV. Oh, sorry, Jeremy, did you want to come in, Councillor Hurley?
Oh, yes, please. It's only just in defence of sort of any fee increase. I think the value for money that we give and the expertise we've got, not just in the SAB department, but in many of the other departments, the value we give, if you had to go out privately for it, then it would cost probably 2-3 times as much. So it's ultra good value for money. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm not against it, Chair. I'm just wanted to know what the figures were.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. We move on to ENVB now, which is transport support, reduction in council revenue spent on local bus support, and utilising Welsh Government grants only to support the bus network. Is that one for you, Dave? Do you want to just give members an overview of this one? Thank you.
Yeah, so in terms of local bus support, it's currently made up of 3 funding mechanisms. We get the Welsh Government supplied bus services support grant, that's £25 million across the whole of Wales, but NPT gets circa 5.1 million. And then similarly, members will recall that we had a bus emergency scheme during COVID. Now that that's come to an end, there's a new bus network grant of 2.77 million, and the council puts its own revenue in of 791k. On top of that, in terms of other funding to support bus services in the authority, we get concessionary fares allocations of circa 1.6 million, a further 113k admin. So in total, for concessionary fares, we get around £2.3 million of support. So the cut that we propose in here today relates to the council's own revenue funding. The grants are currently being reviewed by Welsh Government and are likely to get amalgamated in future years into a single grant. If the values, however, remain the same, then removing the 75,000 would be manageable. The other aspects about this is that obviously there may be some criticism laid at the authority's door in that Welsh Government have been putting in additional funds, but this will mean that, because of our budgetary position, we'll be putting in less ourselves. In real terms, the bus franchising and the bus network that we've now got is fairly stable. It's currently funded without this requirement of the £75,000. What it does mean for members is that if a operator hands back a public bus service, then we won't be in a position like we have in the past to be able to step in and make some transport provision like we have done in the past. So we think it's manageable. We think the grants will remain stable over the next 12 months into next year as well, and throughout next year before we actually get into bus franchising in 2026. So I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you for the overview of that one. So in terms of this one, I had a question that we discussed in pre-briefing. I think you've answered, just for clarity, there's not going to be a direct and immediate impact on any services as a result of that £75,000 cut.
Oh, that's correct, Chair. There'll be no immediate impact as a result of this change in the revenue budget.
So it's more of a reduction of sort of resilience really to deal with
it's reducing our resilience to respond in future years. But as I say, the bus network is looking to be in a good position at the moment. It's certainly stable, and we hope to see some enhancements. We will still have some money available to us. It's not the whole budget. That will allow us to award contracts on a de minimis basis. And we've done some of those recently. So some examples where the new bus routes that were put forward, an element of an estate got dropped off, for example, in the Baglan area. We've been able to do a de minimis award and reinstate those services. Similarly, in the last couple of weeks, we've introduced some de minimis support to bus journeys from Rose to Pontardawe, particularly where home to school was getting adversely affected. So we're still able to step in and do small amounts of work. And as I say, this should be manageable for the authority next year.
Okay, thank you for the clarity on that. I think that is somewhat reassuring. Are there any other indications from members on this item before we move on to ENVC? Okay, I can't see any, so we'll move on to ENVC, which is Community Services Transport Unit, which is cutting the on-call rota, saving £10,000. Over to you again, Dave.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So for the Council's resilience, when we've called to an emergency, we have our in-house drivers and available on a standby rota, which costs in the region of £10,000 per annum. What we have been able to do is, as part of that resilience response, we've spoken to the bus operators that work for the authority, and they will be available to respond should we need to evacuate residents from a locality. What it'll mean is we'll only now be paying for those services when we actually use them, as opposed to having officers on a standby rota. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I didn't have any questions on this item in pre-briefing, but I thought it was just worth getting the overview from the head of service in case members had any queries, but this one is quite straightforward, actually. I can't see any indications either. So we'll move on to ENVD, which is increase in charges to external organisations using the Council's fleet repair services.
Yeah, so we provide services to a number of organizations, and they pay us inspection fees and service fees associated with our fleet and garage operations. Again, these are small nominal charges on each of those inspections.
Thank you. Again, there was one actually question in pre-briefing which was from me, and that was just are we benchmarking these fees against other private operations?
These ones we don't benchmark because they're actual fleet internal charges. But for example, our MOT services where we charge externally are obviously benchmarked against local garages that provide MOT services. But these are small increases on the inspections right across the fleet. So the £6,200 would be charged right across up to sort of 250 vehicles. So again, a nominal increase.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions from members on this item? I can't see any there, so we'll move on to ENVE, which is transport maintenance, additional external income. This one just says as above, so I'm not.
Again, so these charges would be to the likes of South Wales Trunk Road Agency, Titarian, and other external people that we have SLAs for maintenance of their vehicles. Again, a very small nominal amount.
Yeah, thank you. It was a very small amount, just only £1,800, isn't it? Again, we had no questions on this one in pre-brief, and I can't see any indications at the moment either. So we'll move on to ENVF, which is road safety, increased charges on training courses provided to external organisations.
Again, this would be driver training that the road safety team provide. It's likely that next year that City and County of Swansea will be actually entering into an arrangement for us to do some of their training on their behalf. So we think we're comfortable in being able to recover an additional £14,000 of external income.
Okay, thank you. I don't think we had a question on this item in pre-briefing either. Do any members have any questions on this one? Again, seems fairly straightforward if we're picking up some extra training work. I can't see any questions on that one. So move on to ENVG, which is maintenance and bridges. So this is the reduction of the maintenance budget, which is relied upon for bridge inspection works and regular small-scale maintenance, and also covers retaining structures. So are you taking this item?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was torn by having to put this item forward. As I say, we've got very limited budgets that I've got scope to make cuts against. We've got a statutory duty to inspect the council's bridge assets and retaining structures. It doesn't mean, well, we will still continue to inspect all of the bridges. So all bridges will have a general inspection over a 2-year period. And then every 6 years, large span bridges over 10 meters will have a principal inspection. What it will mean is that if we do come up against some difficulties, it would either result in weight restrictions on some of the bridges that we have, or potentially in the worst case scenario closures. But what it does mean, and it is a little bit counterproductive, if we do face emergencies, then we'd be having to turn to the council's capital programme for emergency funding if we needed to respond. So it's not an easy one for us. We will manage the situation But as I say, if we have a failure of we won't be exposed to the risk. We'll still inspect and we'll identify those risks. So if there is serious concerns out there, then we'll highlight them. But, you know, if there are some smaller remedial works, then we would need to turn to the council's capital programme, unfortunately, to maintain those structures going forward.
Okay, thank you. We did have a good discussion on this one in pre-briefing, and my first indication is Councillor Rob Wood.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, I'll start just by saying that I disagree with the methodology of a 5% approach to blanket cuts across the directorate, and this is probably one of the reasons why. Is ultimately, if you cut from a maintenance budget, especially a structural one like this, you are risking life and limb, literally risking life and limb. And I do feel that this one specifically, even though it might not be the greatest on a monetary basis, I just think that it possibly puts our residents at greatest risk of all the budget lines that are in here. And I'm very surprised to see it, but I can understand as well that the pressure that officers are on to find the cuts when you're faced with a 5% blanket cut. You know, you're going to look at everything and you're going to reduce it. But, you know, I, for one, you know, I'm not happy seeing this in the budget lines. And I hope that possibly, we don't know in the future, that it will be removed from the cuts list. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Rob. Nicola, do you want to just come in on this one?
I was just going to say, Chair, last year we took a slightly different approach where we had budget savings to secure. So we took a strategic approach where we tried to deliver transformational change within each of the departments across the board to avoid doing the salami slicing that we have historically done. Unfortunately, despite the best efforts of staff, we weren't able to achieve the amount of savings we required to fill that budget gap, I should say. And then very late in the financial year, then we had to achieve another 2% saving on top of the strategic savings. So I think that's why corporately we've gone for the 5% cut across each of the directorates. I think it's fair to say it's been really, really tough. And I'm not just saying that from my directorate. I'm sure all directorates have found it tough. And we didn't actually achieve the 5% in our directorate. We went back many times to look for additional savings. And I think we were about £91,000 short of a £2.35 million target. So we didn't actually get there. We got close. But it just demonstrates that we've had to look in these areas in order to try and find those savings. And they haven't been easy. And they're not necessarily ones we would have ideally put forward for members to consider. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Nicola. And I think to an extent you're almost echoing Councillor Wood's point in that sense, in that, you know, there was savings being put forward here that officers clearly not particularly comfortable with bringing forward. And again, members will know that the Environment Directorate has taken a significant hit in previous years as an area that has a lot of non-statutory services in. And you know, it makes it even the more difficult to find that 5% actually in this particular area. So there's a couple more questions that we've got. So we've got one from Councillor Tim Bowen, and then I've got another indication to come as well.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My question is, how often are we inspecting bridges now per year? And have we got any bridges that we are actually keeping an eye on?
Yeah, so as I said, we've got 456 bridges in the asset portfolio. Every bridge will have an inspection in a 2-year period. And then the structures that are over 10 metres have a general inspection every 6 years. So they're the more complex structures and can cost, you know, for example, up to £30,000 just to do the inspection. you need to get, scaffolding. We potentially have to have divers in to look at the foundations in the riverbeds. We often have to have plant and equipment and cranes to actually physically inspect those structures. So every bridge gets that inspection. So on average, about 230 bridges a year get inspected by the team. And sorry, what was the second part of the question?
Have we got any bridges that we're actually keeping an eye on at the moment?
We do keep an eye on some of the bridges. Obviously, Cummer is of particular interest at the moment because of the weight restrictions there, and we know that the bridge is in a poor condition, but we've got mitigation schemes there. Fortunately, we did a lot of strengthening work in the late 90s as part of the 40-ton vehicle new load requirements. So a lot of the assets meet that standard. We probably got more concern with retaining structures than we have with bridges, because we're not able to inspect all of those. There's something like 1,800 retaining structures on the network, and we tend to be operating on a reactive basis in terms of those assets, unfortunately.
Okay, lovely, thank you.
Thanks for that, Tim, and thanks for the responses there. Just for clarity then, in terms of the inspections, there's not going to be a reduction in the interval in inspecting bridges as part of this budget line. So is it mainly going to affect the small scale maintenance that would arise as a result of the inspections?
That's right. We've got a statutory duty to undertake the inspection, so we'll maintain all of our inspection levels. It's just any remedial works from that will be managed. They'd be responded to in a slower way, really.
Okay, thank you. I did have another indication, but I think perhaps the question's been answered as part of the discussion. Yeah, Carol, did you have a question on this one?
No, you were right, Chair. My question's been answered now. Thank you.
There we are. That's great. Thank you. Sorry, Bob. Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks, David. On the back of what Tim said, is it possible to produce a spreadsheet of when the last inspections were done and any condition problems so that the committee could have sight of that?
Yes, certainly. I mean, we've got a full structures database with every asset on it, with the inspection regime. I'll look into how easy that is to produce, but certainly we can produce a paper on that for the committee.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I don't think we'd be looking for a detailed, it would just be a spreadsheet to show roughly what kind of stage the inspections are at, if they're every 2 years and then 6 years on the other ones. Yeah.
Okay, we'll pick that up with officers outside the meeting. Thanks, Bob. Are there any other indications from members on this item before we move on? Can't see any there. So the next item is ENVH. This is a savings to the budget in relation to the pension scheme of the City and County of Swansea, shown as no impact. I don't know who's picking this one up. Is that you, Nicola? If you could just explain this to members, it'd be really appreciated.
It's a very straightforward one, and as the report indicates, there is no impact. It's an actuarial adjustment. It's the amount of money we pay in for previous employees who are in the pension scheme, and that changes every couple of years.
Okay, thanks, Nicola. That's we believe to be the case during the pre-briefing, so it's always good to be reassured of that. So I'll move on to ENVI, which is reducing the asset surveys budget, which I think is for highways assets, is it? Yeah, sorry, that's you then, Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Just listening to some of the debate, I put my life jacket on now. Obviously, with a 5% saving, which has been mentioned, I think 2.3 million for the directorate, that works out 1.6 million for street care. So obviously the savings that are coming forward are by necessity significant and wide ranging. The first one again relates to, I say they reduce the asset surveys budget. So it's approximate 10% cut on that budget, which means there'll be less money to do surveys. So we do roads at the moment every year, footways every 2 years, safety fencing about every 3 years. But all main asset groups covered by the Highway Asset Management Plan are covered by surveys, some at different times. So if it's cattle grids or if it's traffic signals, they can all at times be subject to surveys, and you've just considered one of the main asset groups, which has got its own specific budget, which is the bridges budget. So it will mean we will have to review some of that frequency. So there could be possibly some changes in frequency, we might not have as much up-to-date information on which to base our decision making.
Okay. Were there any questions from members on this item? I can't see any from any other members. I know during the pre-briefing, we had a bit of a discussion, much in a similar vein as we did on the bridges item. But I suppose the difference in this one is you'll be looking to review those intervals of inspections to realise the saving. In terms of, I suppose the risk is then that we perhaps use our maintenance budget in a less effective way, isn't it? And is that something you're concerned about by implementing this particular saving?
Well, also when you've got a needs-based process, the most up-to-date data is helpful. But it's about choices again with areas where there are cuts. I mean, we've been at this now, apart from 2 years around the back half of COVID, we've been squeezing the budget since 2008. So, we're really coming up against, difficult areas now. And it's not actually spending money on the ground. So if you're trying to protect spending on the money on the ground, then you end up looking at areas where you're not doing that.
Yeah, no, and I certainly appreciate that. And I think the challenge of this one is a relatively small saving, £11,000. And I guess the question is, could you lose £11,000 worth of value in your spending programme by not having the data to spend that money effectively? And I think that's probably the question for cabinet members and officers to consider in terms of the value for money of the particular saving, because in a roads maintenance scheme, £11,000 is a very small amount of money, isn't it? And could potentially be wasted or spent inefficiently if we don't have the up-to-date asset condition data. So I suppose that's just my observation on that. But I mean, it's one that I'm sure everyone's already made, because as has previously been said, I don't think anyone's particularly happy with putting many of these savings forward. I don't know if you've got anything to add to that, Mike. It's more of an observation than anything else. Okay, I can't see any other indications on this item. No. So we'll move on to ENVJ, which is the reactive maintenance budget, and looking at reducing the number of drainage repair teams from 2 to 1. So this is one for Mike again.
Yeah, as it says, they're reducing the number of teams from 2 to 1, essentially reversing a decision to grow the teams from 1 to 2 back in 2021-22. So with the continuing squeeze on the budgets, we're just unable to sustain that additional effort as much as we would like it.
Okay, thank you. I've got a few indications on this item, and the first one is Councillor Rob Wood.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, for a council that have declared a climate emergency back in 2022 to now be making this decision, to me seems absolute madness. I mean, we've all seen the sad news from Spain, and what goes wrong when things are not done properly. And, as a councillor, as I'm sure nearly all the councillors will be aware, that we've all called on the drainage team's help. And this problem is getting worse. drainage is getting worse. More water is getting worse. There's more surface water, surface rainwater is a terrible problem. And this time of year, especially with autumn and the leaves blocking the drains and things, to be going down to one team from two, it just doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, I know we're under pressure, but I'm sure that, these type of savings where it directly affects the residents that are getting flooded, that drivers can't pass roads, to me, it seems like something that should be, again, not beyond this budget at all. I mean, even if we had to just not make the savings, then we don't make the savings, but we can't let our residents get flooded. Thanks.
Thanks, Rob. I'll only add to those comments briefly in that, we don't even need to look at Spain, do we? We have a fair share of flooding issues in the county, and, quite recently, actually, in the last sort of month or two, we had some flooding in my ward that has never happened before. And I was speaking to the teams during the night where we had some properties flooded, and they've worked for the authority for a long time, and it's a new area of flood. So we are getting, changing and increasing challenges from, extreme weather, extreme rainfall events. And I can only echo concerns. This was particularly concerning one to see in front of us today. Nicola, did you want to come in on this one?
I just wanted to clarify the drainage gang that is proposed to be withdrawn under the proposed budget savings is not in relation to general cleansing of gullies and drainage networks. That will continue. So this particular gang is one that actually does repairs to drainage. Say, for example, you've got a drainage pipe or a culvert that has been damaged. They will go in there and they will dig the road up or dig around the culvert to repair it. So the day-to-day cleansing of the drainage infrastructure will continue, albeit it is becoming more and more difficult to prepare for extreme weather events and to respond to them, because our drainage infrastructure is so old as a country, not just in Neath but Talbot, and the volume of water that they can accommodate is very restricted. And with extreme weather becoming more and more common, where significant volumes of water fall in a very short period of time, that is when we normally have the flooding that unfortunately our constituents in Neath but Talbot experience more and more these days. So it's not to cut the cleansing, it's to deal with any damage and then the repair of that. Not that it's any more acceptable, but I just wanted to clarify that.
Thanks, Nicola. I appreciate the clarity, but as you said there, I think if anything, it's probably more critical, given that we've got aging infrastructure, that it's in working and functional order. Councillor Robert wants to
if I can just come back on that, and I'd ask the director then, well, what do we do if one of the drains collapses or one of the pipes collapses? What mitigation is in place if we are getting rid of that team, and how much is that likely to cost? Thanks.
It'll just have to wait till the remaining gang can get around to fix it, Councillor, as it did before.
Yeah, so it's just an increase in the time to respond to the incident. So perhaps we'll have more infrastructure awaiting repair at any one time. Okay. Scott, did you want to come in?
Yeah, only briefly. Thank you, Chair. It's only to touch upon, the drainage team, as part of these proposals, is a new drainage team that this administration implemented 2 years ago. Because prior to that, the existing drainage team, the frontline team, so we're going back to where we was 2 years ago, basically. Now, it could be an opportunity that some of these are taken out of the budget. That'll be dependent on what money comes from London to Cardiff, which we've got an idea. But equally, it'll be depending on how much money comes from Cardiff to Neath but Talbot as well. The last point I'll say, Chair, is that it's all very well good sitting here in crucifying it, and nobody's done that more than me, as the director will tell you. But you've got to find alternatives. And if Councillor Wood or anybody else has got other alternatives of where else other than the drainage section we take it from, then write to me or the director. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. And look, the context is important, and I think we're all hopeful or hoping that if we do have a more favourable settlement than expected, some of these items can be removed. I think part of the scrutiny process is weeding out the ones that are least palatable, in order for you guys as cabinet members to make those decisions over what is removed. And in that context, it is important that we scrutinise these proposals, as they are. Though I accept your point, if there are any suggestions from anybody of what else we can do, they should definitely come forward as well. I've got two other indications on this one, so I'll go to Councillor Carol Clement-Williams first. Carol.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, we've sat on the other side. We know how tough it is. These decisions, the decisions we've been making since I was elected in 2012, always seem to be difficult, unfortunately. But this one scares me. People might think because Baglan's on the side of a mountain, you don't get flooding. It'll be in the valleys, but we get tremendous amount of flooding in Baglan. Now, for me, what we need to weigh up here is if drains aren't being mended as quickly as possible, then there's a degree of, by it not being repaired, will it collapse totally, and then will it in the long run end up being a false economy? Sometimes you need to speculate to accumulate. But I mean, when it comes to flooding, I've had a flooding in my house, and that was from a clean water pipe, and it was horrendous. It was absolutely horrendous. When people get flooded out, they get flooded out with muck, mud. I'd hate to think what else, and it completely ruins lives. So if we are gifted with a little bit more cash, I would hope this one of all of them is the one that goes away, because it terrifies me. As Scott, I think it was Rob said about Spain, it's devastating. It's absolutely devastating. And to put it all right, it's just going to cost more. I have to say, it was the same with the bridges. I mean, we've tried that one before, and you end up getting kicked in the backside later on because you have to invest so much more money to do the work. So I desperately would say I totally understand, as an ex-cabinet member for finance, where you're coming from, Scott. And I'm saying this from the heart, and it's not a dig, but this one scares me more than anything else in this paper. I'm terrified of flooding. It's the worst thing I worry about. So please, if we can we scrap this one, because I'm really not for it. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Carol. I think you've just echoed the strength of feeling in the room, perhaps, on this one. I have one question on this. So I was mulling over after a pre-briefing. Just in terms of, again, this is a kind of loss of resilience cut again, isn't it? And I am mindful that, we do have quite a lot of separate teams in the council doing other activities. And I was curious whether we'd considered the possibility of other teams in the council being able to step in certain circumstances to carry out some of this reactive work, if perhaps we had a lot of gullies collapse at the same time. And I don't know the feasibility of that, but I'd just be curious to hear from officers whether they've thought about ways of perhaps maintaining some of that resilience, maybe having to choose between repairing a gully and carrying out some other work elsewhere. I don't know if officers have any thoughts on that particular question.
Yeah, Chair. Of course, all areas are being cut, which is one thing. So there's sort of reductions everywhere. We do have staff who are focused on capital work, who would have the skills to do it, but of course they're unfunded in terms of doing day-to-day activity. So if they're not actually working on a capital scheme, then their work is unfunded. Now, that's not to say I wouldn't let them just sit around if they had nothing to do, and we could utilise them, but their focus is on working on capital. And of course we've reduced that. I think we've got half the number of gangs and capital that we had, when I started 20 years ago. So that area's dropped as well.
So perhaps there's limited capacity to achieve that as well. Tim, did you have a question on this one?
Just a quick question, Mike, and I don't know if you'll be able to, you won't be able to answer now, but if you could get back to us. The percentage of drains and stuff that the council own to the percentage of what Welsh Water own, would you be able to, or are we responsible for all drainage on main roads?
Yeah, no, I haven't got that figure to hand.
No, I'm not saying
a lot of there are combined sewer and drains, and we'd have to do a calculation on that and work that out. I'm sure the drainage team could get to the bottom of that, given enough time and effort to do it. But
that's not a problem. I was just wondering, you know, if it's a bigger percentage that Welsh Water own to what the council actually own or responsible for. Sorry,
yeah, I can't really answer that question.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, Bob.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a technical question, really. Column 5 is showing reduction of the drainage team, £130,000 savings, and column 7 showing £210,000 savings.
Yeah, apologies, Chair. I should, because I've noticed
it's over the page.
Report goes over to, so there is a second part to this.
Okay.
Savings.
I was about to come to that, Bob, actually, because I missed it when I first read it out. So,
and that is to reduce the reactive maintenance budget by 80k. So there's a certain amount of money built into the budget every year for things like gritting and responding to severe weather, but only so much, because obviously that can vary every year. And we also, as well as the reactive highway budget, we have, in accordance with good practice, we have a what's called winter maintenance reserve, a severe weather reserve. So if we're under, then it means we've got a bit of money to do some extra maintenance with in a year or pay into the reserve. And if we're over, then you call on the reserve. And the idea we could, that over a sort of 8 year, I think it's a 10-year cycle, Sean, I think it is. We work it out over a 10-year cycle. It all should balance out, but it helps to cushion you from shocks when you do get severe weather. You know, if you have a whiteout, for example, and you have to go on to 24-hour gritting, snow ploughing, you know, that can really rack up a lot of costs very quickly. So that you have a reserve, you know, which you can draw on the bad years and then pay in during the good years. And by reducing the money in the reactive budget, that will mean we're more likely to have to call on the reserve than we are now.
Okay, thanks for that. Just in terms of that reserve, is that in a good place at the moment that we feel we could manage that for a period of time?
It's 600,000, I think, that sort of order, when it's been there for a little while now.
I think it's fair to say there's a lot of churn in that reserve. So if we're not using it to purchase grit, we're potentially dealing with flooding incidents. And you know, as the climate is changing, we're having less snow and ice, but we're having more flooding issues. So we utilise it for those purposes as well. So as Mike says, we keep paying in, and some years we're higher than others because there's constant churn.
Okay, but I think that the buffer is perhaps there. So if we did have something severe, this isn't going to cause us a problem. I've got Scott and I've got Councillor Hurley, so I'll call them both in and then we'll perhaps move on to the next item.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's only a quick one again. It's only to thank Councillor Clement Williams. Some very well points made there. And assurances that I've had from officers, you know, if we do need to deal with emergencies, I mean, this council has got a good track record in the previous administration and clearly in this administration as well. And I'm sure that we will be in a position to pull out all the stops should we need to, because we have done to date. But equally, you know, this is another budget item whereby, you know, I don't think anybody in this room wants to be sitting here looking at doing away with any type of teams. Never mind a small drainage team, but equally, as the treasurer who's sitting the other end of the side of me quite often reminds me, if this is to come off the table, we need to find alternatives. So I need this scrutiny committee to work with me.
I appreciate that. I'm only going to stop you there because we can't make this point on every item. We've got a lot to get through in the meeting, but I think the point's well made about finding alternatives, Scott. Thank you. Councillor Hurley?
Yeah, it's just to echo what Councillor Jones has said again. I think Councillor Clement said about speculate to accumulate. We have basically got nothing left to speculate with, and that's why these officers are making these hard decisions. Regarding flooding as well, I think we had Steve Owen in a couple of meetings back telling us how many schemes we've got ready for flood prevention and flood damage. but again, funded by Welsh Gov. So we've got all the schemes up and sitting there waiting to be put into operation, but we can't do them because we aren't being funded by Welsh Gov. So that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll move on to ENVK now, which is maintenance day-to-day, which covers a few areas. That's tarmac bridleways, and fees and charges for use of the highway, and the day-to-day works budget, and the consultancy support budget. So is that another one for you, Mike?
Okay, as you say, there's several parts to this. First one, there's an allocation in the highway budget. It's been there since I started to do with tarmac bridleways. I think West Glamorgan tarmacs and bridleways back before local government reorganisation. And as an area that's probably not really core business in terms of making the highways, it's can we release that funding and perhaps have unmade bridleways in the same way that the most of the bridleways are unmade. So, and I know that's an area that other councils are looking at in terms of unclassified roads, for example, whether they can return those to unmade materials. Increasing the fees and charges, that, as it says there, by 10% or in line with Swansea, whichever is bigger, to create to increase income by 50,000. Reducing the day-to-day works budget. So really that is it's off the top, it's 5% salami slice off the signs and road markings budget, and a 100k reversal of growth in the budget in 2022-23. So again, that's unfortunately an area where, you know, we look to do better financially, and we're unable to sustain that that level of increase. And then lastly, the consultancy support budget. Again, that was an area again that we identified as needing additional support, and we're having to cut back on that support by 50% that went in 22-23. But then that reduces the opportunity to help us with bids for funding, and analysing the more difficult developer submissions, for example, where we need specialist support.
Okay, thank you for outlining that. I've got an indication from Councillor Tim Bowen. Tim?
Yeah, it's not a question, Mike. It's total agreement. I don't see why we should be tarmacking bridleways. As someone who actually owns horses, we go out riding on a regular basis, and we don't go on tarmac roads. You know, all bridleways up with us are just normal shingle, and you know, most horse riders make their own way. So I am in total agreement. Once they start breaking up, we do away with them.
Okay, thanks for the observation there, Tim. The one thing that jumped out for me in this one again was this 25k saving in the consultancy support budget. As you've said, you know, that might cause us to lose access to grant funding or be able to do larger pieces of work. And I suppose that was one of the kind of red flags, really. Is that going to be a good value for money saving to achieve from the revenue budget if we're going to miss out on significant investment in the borough, particularly if we're spending day-to-day revenue on maintaining and repairing aging assets that we're then not able to replace with capital funding. So that was just one of those savings that just seems completely counterintuitive to me. And I think there was another, it's an indication from Councillor Rob Wood, so I'll let Rob come in.
Yes, it's just briefly, Chair. It's the speed cushions on this one that intrigues me slightly. I mean, in my ward, we had a speed cushion which went faulty and ripped the underside of a car to pieces. And I mean, you know, it ends up then the council is exposed once again to spending more money than it would have been to inspect the speed cushion. And the quality of the current speed cushions, I know something of this because there are so many in my ward, you couldn't miss them. The quality of the current ones that are in usage is very poor. And I just feel that if they are not inspected regularly, you're just going to have more claims against the council for damage to cars. Just making that point. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Rob. Did anyone want to respond to any of those points that have been made. Okay, I'll just perhaps add to my point in the sense of, have we considered looking at, some sort of spend to save reserve in terms of drainage feasibility work in the context of being able to spend money on consultancy fees to apply for grant funding to reduce the maintenance liability in the revenue budget? Is that something that we've looked at rather than just taking this?
That's what the consultancy budget is for. In the individual pots, we've got in some pots we've got consultancy fees. So and that's not just in relation to Mike's area; it's across the board. So where we haven't got the internal specialist experience that we would need to feed into grant applications, for example, we can buy that service in. And it's that pot in relation to the highways maintenance side of things that is being shrunk under this budget saving, but it's actually featured in many of the heads of service budget proposals that before you today, and historically over the last few years we've cut away at those budgets because we've got nowhere else to go. But we have got those budgets set up already, but as I say, they are reducing.
Okay, thank you, Nicola. I can't see any other indications from members on this one. So I'll move on to ENVL, which is lighting services, and there are 2 items within this one as well, relating to dimming and trimming. So I'll hand over to Mike for this one.
You're getting fed up with me, Chair. The first, well, I think in the broader terms, we know energy's been going up and up, and as I've discussed with members before, I'm trying to bring forward a scheme where we actually have a big solar scheme that generates as much power as we use in street lighting energy to try and de-link us from the pressures, so hopefully when the cost of energy goes up, our income for energy goes up, but we're not there. So again, to do the savings, so we currently have dimming happens in a large part of the county borough already as part of previous saving strategies. And we can bring that forward. So instead of dimming at 1 o'clock in the morning, we can dim it at 10 o'clock. I mean, I guess this will be a bit more noticeable for people, again, more people out and about. But that's an area where we could make some savings. And the other side is that the been described as trimming in the past, in that the lights come on and off with a certain lux level. So there's the cells that are on the street lights, and we can adjust the setting on those so that they just come on a little bit later and they go off a bit earlier with the lux levels, and it really is just saving a little bit. So the lights would be off, say, we think 10 to 20 minutes a day less than they are now. So and we do that through the central management system, which the majority of lights are on the council central management system. So we can adjust that from the office.
Okay, thank you for the overview of that. We did have a couple of questions from pre-briefing, and the first is Councillor Cathy James. I think part of this may have been answered, but there may still be a question on this one. Cathy?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It was just on the dimming. Can you remind us what sort of percentage dimming we're talking about for this?
Yeah, I think it goes down to the current dimming goes down to 42% in a lot of the sort of residential areas. So it would be dimming down to 42% at 10 o'clock instead of 1 o'clock in the morning.
Okay, and what areas will that be happening in?
The majority of the county borough, but not the sort of main arterial routes and main sort of pedestrian conflict areas. So it'll be the I think there's about 14,000 of the 17,000 streetlights we've got subject to dimming, and it'll be all of those, which is essentially all the residential areas.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Cathy. Thanks, Mike. Does this one apply to just the LED lamps? Because I know we've had a lot of discussion on lighting at some of the scrutiny committees, and I wasn't sure if the fluorescent lamps are already sort of dimmed as much as they could be dimmed generally, or does this apply across the board?
a lot of the fluorescent lights are already dimmed, but they're dimmed from 1 o'clock in the morning, not 10. So it would apply to some of those as well.
Okay, no, I appreciate that clarity. That's useful. Bob, did you have a question on this one? Okay, no worries. That's fine. Sorry, were there any other indications on this item before we move on? Carol?
Thanks, Chair. Oh, thanks, Chair. Sorry, my computer's like a slug. So there's just one thing I would say about this one. My concerns around anyone, not just women, but anybody walking home. The pubs close at 11. So would there be exceptions for areas where people will be walking home from pubs? I mean, I would say you'll get some of these questions in Cabinet as well. But a couple of my colleagues are really afraid of the safety of people walking home on their own. So I'm assuming town centres and that wouldn't have this, but you know there are rural areas as well where you've got villages with pubs and things like that. So just pointing that out because I think it is something that has been discussed before. So thanks.
Thanks, Carl. My understanding is this is a blanket approach, but I don't know if Mike just wants to clarify that point.
Yeah, I think as we've done before, there's always the potential to turn the wick back up in response to localized issues. But of course, the more we do that, then the less savings we make. So
But the current proposal as set out is as a blanket approach across the county, other than the arterial roads you mentioned.
yes, but obviously we would try and be responsive if there were particular concerns.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. Bob, yeah, of course, yeah.
I checked my notes then, and I did question in the pre-briefing. My question was, how many of the lights are now LED, and would it be a good investment to increase the number of LED lights? Would that make us more saving in the long run? Are they cheaper to run or not?
Everywhere where there is a business case to change the lights, we've already done it. So we've still got quite a number of the fluorescents, but they are actually very good in terms of energy usage, but they've stopped making those now. So every year we're slowly turning those over to LEDs, and then we're cannibalizing the ones that we take out and using those to keep the other fluorescents going. So over time they will all get changed, but everything where there is a business case to advance it, we've already done it, and we use Salix funding, which is basically 0% interest money to do it. So we have done that.
Thanks, Bob. We'll move on now to ENVM. It's another one for Mike, which is Neighbourhood Management Services. And there's a number of items within this one, which includes litter, fast roads team, seasonal staff, and the grindbusters. So, Mike, over to you.
Okay, and if you get fed up with me, my colleague, the Neighbour Services Manager, is on the call, and you might want to call him for a bit of this.
You're welcome to hand over to a colleague if you wish, Mike.
But just, yeah, so I'd say 5% cut across street care, 1.6 million, inevitably extends to all areas of the division. And in neighbourhood services, we're talking about reduction of 6 employees, full-time employees, reduction of 6 seasonal staff, and a reduction of a couple of staff on the fast road teams and the grindbuster vehicle that we've got. We're talking about not staffing that permanently now, but just using it when we need it from other staff. So there'd be two people to go there. So all in all, totaling of £379,000 saving.
Okay. I've got a few indications on this one from pre-briefing, and I'm just working out which order these questions are in. I think Councillor Tim Bowen, you had a question in relation to the seasonal staff.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. on a weekly basis, through the summer, your seasonal staff are not up to standard of what the jobs they're supposed to be doing, whether it's litter picking, grass cutting or not. I see it on, quite a regular basis in the village where seasonal staff are not doing the jobs they're supposed to be doing. Where someone is cutting 50 meters, they might be cutting 10 meters. Is it something we should be looking at, of better management, better employment, looking at them when we're employing them and giving them a time scale of where they should be up to a standard? If not, we should be getting rid of them. I know it's awkward to keep training them, but with having seasonal staff that they're just not up to the standard of what work they should be doing.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Mike, do you want to take this one?
Well, yeah.
Actually, James has popped his hand up as well. So.
Yeah, well, I'll leave James come in a second, but obviously they get a lot of training, our seasonal staff, because we have a duty to do that. A lot of them are very good, and they come back every year, and that's absolutely fine. Yes, by the nature of taking on seasonal staff, some turn out to be not as good as we hoped they were in the appointment process, and managers and supervisors will work on those staff to get them up to standard. So yes, so of course we monitor them we monitor all our staff, but because there is a churn, there is a slight more scope for having taking on some people who don't perform as we'd like them to. But then of course we don't have them back if they don't come up to standard. I don't know if James, you want to add anything?
James?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Thanks, Chair. I think the difficulty for us this year is that we've had a real good group of seasonals we've taken on, and we've got some vacancies, but we can't put them into those jobs on a permanent basis because obviously we're cutting them as part of the other proposals within the neighbourhood. But no, I take your point. One thing we do is, like I said, we do manage them closely with our supervisors. If they aren't up to the mark, then obviously they're not on the full terms and conditions, so we can deal them through the probationary period, and they don't stay long. But it's something we certainly do, and if there's any issues, please point them out to us.
Yeah, do you want to come back, Tim?
Sorry, James, I'll ask a question to you. If they're not up to standard, why are we still keeping them for that probationary period? It's dead wood, basically. If that was in the private sector, they wouldn't be kept in the job. And I don't like seeing anybody losing their jobs or whatever, but, if you got one guy that's doing twice as much work as the other one, then it's not actually fair on that particular guy, although they got a better chance of being taken on full time.
Just to come back to we don't keep them on for longer than we need to if they aren't meeting the standards and they are let go. The point you made is an important one in terms of taking seasonal staff on and the retraining. Doing the season can be difficult and obviously costly as well. So sometimes we do actually end up finishing with less than we took on at the start, depending on the timings. But so if there are any specific ones that you want to point out, obviously maybe outside of the meeting, let me know and we can address it.
Okay, lovely, thanks.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Councillor Robert, do you have a question?
Yes, thanks, Chair. It's just a bit of clarity it is on what Mike said there about redundancies. What is the total number of actual redundancies that will occur in relation to this proposed budget line?
I thought it was 10. James will know the actual number for neighbourhood services.
James?
Yes, yeah, it's 10 permanent full-time posts with the neighbourhood.
Thanks, that's great.
Okay, great, thank you. I just check. Councillor Bob Wilford, you had a question in relation to volunteer groups.
I did indeed, Sean. I'm glad you're here because you just keep reminding me of things I was asking. Yeah, I'm setting a volunteer group up in my ward to clear pathways and bridleways. And there's a scheme running within Neath Talbot now with time credits. And I was just going to ask, are we using that? Can wards use that? And the other thing on this line is specifically with this subject. I've done a lot of work with parks and groundsmanship as a volunteer in Pontardawe, and I used the probation service and people who were doing unpaid work for the probation service. I just would like to know how much we engage in that, and with the current changes in the penal system, whether it be worth as a council approaching actually at Welsh government level and getting some kind of agreement that we could use these people who are doing community service as their punishments and employ them to do the more basic tasks, the non-skilled tasks, such as emptying bins, and perhaps those people could be redeployed where we need them in other areas.
Thanks, Bob. Mike?
Again, a couple of things James might want to add to it, but we obviously work with a number of friends groups at the moment, and we've got an officer who works with them and who's also working with the community coordinators and looking at how we can engage volunteers more widely, and that's perhaps something we can hook you in with, councillor. We do use the probation service. We provide them with a vehicle, whatever, and that's an area that we protected over all the years since 2008, because not only because I think it's worthwhile, but also they can do work in perhaps unadopted areas and things, or areas of unknown ownership where the council can't do that. The probationary service can do that and do good things for the community. So that is something that we have done. Whether that could be expanded or not is another question. But we certainly do work with the probationary service. James, did you want to come in, if that's all right, Chair?
James?
Yeah, to be honest with you, Mike, I think you've covered it there. We do a lot of work with a lot of volunteer groups, and it's something we're looking to coordinate now across the whole council. As obviously there's a number of different service areas that do work with volunteers. The probation team are a fantastic asset. Like I said, the only thing that we have to contribute there is obviously a list of jobs and pay for a vehicle. But yeah, they do some really good work for us, whether that's painting, iron work, or it's clearance work, or whatever it is. And like you said, yeah, it's something we could explore in terms of extending it, but it would just be obviously additional vehicles because it's not something that they can provide.
Okay, thanks both.
Yeah, thanks. That's great, and I'm glad to see that we're doing that. And I know it's maybe stepping up to the next level, but actually getting involved now with the new penal system. I mean, perhaps more on a national basis, we could be looking as a kind of trailblaze to take this forward and put to the Welsh Government within Wales, perhaps we could use these people a lot more. And I'm not looking at losing jobs. I just think that our skilled workers could be redeployed and save us money elsewhere. And these people could be used for the kind of lower technical jobs that we need doing.
Thanks, Bob. I think officers have covered that off there. One of the things actually the probation service have been doing in my ward for many years is painting the whale on the seafront. So that's one of the many important tasks they do carry out, which is worth members knowing. Tim, I think you had a question in relation to community councils, didn't you?
Yeah. With grass cutting going possibility from 3 to 4 weeks to 5 to 6. Many years ago, community councils used to be given a small precept to cut grass within the areas. Why wasn't this viable? And is it possible that this is something we could look at to reintroduce?
Thanks, Tim. Mike?
Well, one of the issues, of course, is that only half the county borough is covered by community councils, and this has been an issue in all sorts of things. So I think if we wanted to do something, we need to do something consistent, and how we would do that in the current situation is difficult. And of course, there's loads of duties in terms of health and safety and monitoring and training and everything, which we can certainly deliver as a council, and that's much more difficult to do that piecemeal. And of course, if we were paying, we'd still have a duty to sort of monitor and make sure that all that's being done correctly.
this was something that was in place many years ago. That community council did get the precept, to cut the grass. So why is it changed all of a sudden that, there's so many risks now to what it was then?
Okay, well, I mean, health and safety has come on in leaps. I mean, I don't. I've been doing this job for 20 years in January, and I certainly before then. So sorry, my knowledge doesn't go back that far, but I know in lots of other areas we've looked at over the years, when we were paddling pools and all sorts of things, that the health and safety requirements now are an awful lot tighter than they used to be.
Nicola?
Yeah, I haven't been working here quite as long as Mike, but I am aware that a number of community councils, they didn't get a precept, but what they did do is they made a contribution towards undertaking work on behalf of the local authority in their areas. So, for example, a number of community councils and town councils had a sum of money that they utilised to clear public rights of way, for example. So there were agreements in place with a number of community and town councils at that time. But as sort of austerity progressed, a number of those community councils withdrew from that because it was becoming more and more difficult for them to undertake that works, but they were paying for it out of their budget. So they get a precept from the council already as part of the council tax settlement. So they were utilising that money together with any grant funding they may have secured from elsewhere to undertake that role in their communities historically. But as I say, over time, that has reduced. So I don't know if that's what you're talking about, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Nicola, for the clarity, and I think that's been quite helpful. A couple of questions from me, just in terms of a few of the proposals refer to digitisation of the service, maybe realising some efficiencies that would offset the impact. And I'm just a little bit curious what you mean by that and how that might, for example, offset the impact of losing some litter pickers or some of the fast road teams, as it's referred to.
Okay, I'm going to hand over to James at this point, Chair, if I may. But obviously, if you do, once you've digitized, where everything is, you can do route optimization. It'll be about releasing resources in one area to compensate in another area. I'm sure that's what type of thing James is looking at.
Okay, James, did you have anything to add? Is it just a route optimization approach, or is there another element to the digitization?
Thanks, Chair. So I've been in post now for 3 years, and one thing that we've identified as one of the things we need to improve is our sort of asset management within the neighbourhood. So that goes hand in hand then with the digitization of the service. Once we've got that asset data that we need in a digital format, it allows us to change things and do transformation programs a lot quicker. We've recently gone through an establishment change with the team to set up the resource that we need and we require to take that forward at a quick pace. So whilst obviously the cutting the 10 permanent vacancies and taking on 6 less seasonal staff during the summer, we're not going to be able to accommodate for that total loss. What we're hoping to do is, like I said, improve the efficiency of our service through the digitalisation of our assets.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think I can understand where you're coming from on that front. It is just working a bit smarter with the resources we've got, really. One other question, just in relation to grass cutting that was picked up. Obviously, if we went from a 3 to 4 to a 5 to 6 weekly cycle, there'd be sort of an immediate noticeable, impact in many areas. Are we considering, and have we considered perhaps looking at some of the activities that the biodiversity team promote, even if just things like edge cutting footpaths near highways, rather than cutting a whole section of grass that might save a little bit of time and resource, but still allow us to keep areas of the county looking tidy, or in some cases keeping footpaths accessible? Is that something we're looking at as we reallocate that seasonal resource?
We've got biodiversity areas throughout the county borough where we have a different management regime, and that doesn't just apply to the number of times that we cut the grass. It's also in relation to collecting the cuttings, etc., and utilising them elsewhere. So we have got those schemes already running, and we do try to minimise, obviously, the amount of money we spend on verges without compromising highway safety. So we will cut the edge of the verge nearest the highway, and then on very sort of complicated junctions, we'll do more cutting than on very simple, on simple junctions then, for example. So we are doing that where we can. But the operational side of things will still rest with Mike and his team, albeit in conjunction in terms of advice and guidance from the ecologists who work in Kerry's team. So we do operate together collectively to ensure whether we're doing the right things in the right area. And one size doesn't always fit all, but we do have those systems in place.
Thanks. I suppose what I'm saying is I'm mindful, actually, I went through a lot of this with the biodiversity team a few years ago, the difficulty of getting the site changed in terms of different management. You do need the different equipment and all of those things to do it. I suppose what I'm referencing is, could we perhaps just borrow maybe the edge cutting methodology to allow us to keep other parts of the county tidier if we're going to reduce the frequency, still cut it on a 5 to 6 weekly frequency, not adopt a biodiversity management, but maintain a more regular edge cut, which would be able to be quicker to try and balance the need to keep the county tidy versus the savings. I think that's sort of what I'm saying, rather than getting full into changing the management, having to get more cut and collect vehicles and all of those sorts of things.
Yeah, again, I mean, James would be the best person to advise on the detail, but I think what you're saying is doing a swathe adjacent to the road and leaving the rest in behind longer and that type of thing. Well, I'm sure some of that's already being done as part of the bee friendly regime, but James, you got any comments on that?
James?
Yeah, thanks both. Yeah, like you said, John, I know you're aware of it. There's the Countryside and Wildlife team and my team meet every month to review the actual sites that are actually managed slightly different, obviously to improve biodiversity and enhance wildlife. One thing we are looking at, and I suppose it's important to note here, is that the 3 to 4 weekly to the 5 to 6 weekly is an estimate. It's not exact science. That'll come to fruition as we start the growing season next year. But one thing we are looking at through the winter is how many of these sites can we actually hand over. When I say hand over, so we give them over to biodiversity is sort of the terminology we use. And I suppose members come in there as well, because you've got a lot of the local knowledge, as to, is a site used for amenity purposes? Is it not reused at all? Is it suitable to be cut less often? Because obviously all that will help, because then the areas that will still be receiving a regular cut will hopefully be able to be done on around a 4-week basis rather than 5 to 6.
Okay, thanks, James. I think that I suppose you're looking at all those aspects as you plan for next year. So that's reassuring to hear. I have no more indications on this particular item, so I'm going to move on to ENVN, which is refuse and recycling collection. I think we have this one has also gone over to the next page, so there's a couple of lines over on the next page just for members to be aware, and I'll hand over to Mike. But what I will say is we're scrutinising these proposals in detail on Friday. We've got some questions from pre-brief. We're going to try and keep those to the budgetary implications if possible today, so that we can get into the more detailed scrutiny on Friday, because we'll have a lot more time there, and we've only got a few items on the agenda on Friday. So just to note for members to perhaps be focused today, because it's already 3:25. Mike.
Thank you, Chair. As you say, you're in a lot more detail on Friday, and a full report to consider there with a lot more detail. In terms of 3-week collections, we've been looking at this for a while now, been out to public consultation, as members know, and have considered the consultation process. And of course, what's changed since we started that journey at looking at that, of course, we're now being asked, as throughout this whole process, the 5% saving we've been asked for corporally for all services. So waste services is the largest individual budget in the directorate, and a 5% saving comes to 739,000. So encompassing the two points there. Now, we need to invest to improve recycling if we're going to exceed the 70%. but we also need to now make 5% contribution. That's what being asked for to the corporate centre. So both the savings, whether it's the 3 weekly or the green waste, they're both of the same sort of order of magnitude. Call it, I know it's 730, but call it 800,000. They're that sort of order of magnitude, but within a sort of budget estimation, because we don't know. We can look at the experience elsewhere, but until it actually happens, we don't know exactly how many people would sign up to a charging regime. We don't know exactly the extra diversion that we'll get. We can estimates again, but we don't know exactly. So you've got two measures, both of the same sort of order of magnitude saving, and you know, whether you count one or the other depends what you want to do. But this is looking at this the saving from the 3 weekly collections manifesting itself in savings in collections and savings in the disposal, call it disposal budget, with more waste being diverted to recycling.
Okay, thank you, Mike, for introducing those. And just for clarity for members, we're looking at N and O over on the following page because they're both linked together. My first indication from pre-briefing is from Councillor Cathy James. Cathy?
Thanks, Chair. You have partly answered my question, Mike. It's when we were talking about the waste strategy last year, obviously the 3 weekly bin collection came up there. And I remember quite clearly at that point, it was being mooted, right, this is a measure not to save money, it's a measure to increase recycling. But now here it is as very much, this is a budget saving measure. So I'm just curious as to whether that's merely a change of emphasis, and it always was going to save us money, but that wasn't the important thing. Whereas now the important thing is it's saving us money as well. And perhaps you've said it's roughly a 50-50 split between the charges from green waste and the saving from the 3 weekly. But if there's any more detail we could have on the numbers involved, I think that would be useful.
Thanks, Cathy. Mike, do you want to take that question?
Yeah, I think it's like things have changed over time, that we're now wanting to invest to improve and to deliver savings. And if you do both, you could take one or the other. They're both of a similar order. So if the green waste one, if we have a charging regime which releases the money the council's spending on that, then the savings would be on an income line rather than those two saving lines. It's almost what lines do you want to allocate your savings to? Is it are you taking the green waste as the savings as an enhanced income, or are you taking the 3 weekly as the savings and use the green waste to invest? It's sort of 6.5 dozen really, but it's having to do two things to now deliver savings to invest to improve, and deliver savings to return a 5% return to the corporate centre, saving to the corporate centre. And I don't know what you're going to look at when you look at the detail, what you're going to recommend or not recommend, or support or not support. And I don't know what decisions they're going to take when it comes to cabinet.
Yeah, I think we'll get into that latter part definitely on Friday. But just in terms of the financial, I'm not sure I completely follow what you said there, Mike. How did you take that, Cathy? Because I'm not sure I'm any the wiser.
Yeah, I nearly followed. I think it might be more useful to pick this up on Friday when we are looking at everything in much more detail, and perhaps we can look at the costs of the individual bits at that point. I think for now I'm willing to accept that we don't quite know how it's going to play out, and there will be money coming in and money going out. And this is just a rough figure, but I think I'm happy to wait till Friday for a bit more detail on exactly what's going on.
Okay, thanks. I think that might be useful, because I read the report this morning for Friday, and there's quite a lot in there to go through. Councillor Rob Wood was the next indication. Rob.
Yes, as I say, I'm not going into the detail of it. I'm just very, very surprised to see this year. I mean, all we had were from the coalition cabinet was, we're not going to 3 weekly collections. We were accused of misleading the public. when we put it out in the public domain that the council was thinking of going to 3-week collections, and now we get this. You know, I mean, where are we going here? You know, I sat here opposite the leader, and even he reassured me that we weren't going to 3 weekly collections. So what does this mean now? That 3 weekly collections, we are going to them, or are we going to take this budget line out and get rid of this madness? Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Rob. I'll let Nicola come in briefly, but again, I think perhaps this is more of a policy discussion to have on Friday. But Nicola, if you just want to come in briefly, that's fine.
Yeah, just to clarify, the budget proposals within this report are recommended by officers. So these are what officers are suggesting you consider in order to balance the budget next year. So these have not been signed off politically, and obviously that they will go through cabinet at some stage in some point in time in the future. So these are officers' recommendations at the moment. And as we mentioned earlier on, there are some recommendations that are more acceptable to officers than others. Now, this recommendation will enable us to save money, which is obviously important given the budget gap that we potentially are facing going forward, but it will also enable us to achieve 70% recycling figures, which is a Welsh Government requirement. So it's an officer recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Nicola. I suppose for clarity, you know, we'll understand on Friday perhaps how these proposals have changed from when we looked at the waste strategy last. But in terms of the waste strategy itself, that has been endorsed by the cabinet, and that does include the 3 weekly bin collections as an option. So I think that element is not an officer recommendation. But obviously, what we don't know is what's changed from that point in time to the report we'll be looking at on Friday, because I think there's definitely some changes in the detail to realise that saving of 740,000, which I don't think was quite there when we looked at this last. Everything else, I think we'll wait for Friday to come back on that. I can see Councillor Wood waving at me there, but we've got a fair bit more to get through today. So I'll move on now to ENVP, which is cemeteries, and that's around fees and charges. Mike?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so again, this is about you know, bringing our fees and charges into line with neighbours, really. Got any much more to add to that?
Okay, that's fine. Did any members have any questions on this particular item? Cemeteries, fees and charges. I can't see any on that one. I don't think we had any in pre-briefing. So we'll move on to ENVS, which is a line for Kerry. So Mike can have a little break now, and we move over to development management, and this is trimming of some budget lines. Kerry?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I didn't particularly want to follow Mike because some of the eye-watering numbers that Mike has gone through, it makes mine look quite modest. But just to assure members, you know, like everyone else, I've been asked to find the 5% from my budget area. So that's not to say what I've sort of proposed is not easy, and each has its own implications, which I'll perhaps touch on as we go through. But yeah, the first one relates to the development management planning budget line, and as I say, mine generally are a mixture of income generation ideas, some fee increases, some trimming of budget lines, and perhaps one of the difficult choices in terms of service delivery. But this particular one looks to trim a couple of budget lines in terms of statutory advertising and other advertising, and also the bulk of this particular proposal comes around reduction of the professional fees budget. Members will know, of course, that planning is quite often a complex process, and sometimes with a myriad of variables in terms of any particular proposal, and sometimes, you know, there is a need to engage and get sort of professional and counsel opinion on certain issues. So, you know, this particular proposal does sort of reduce our ability to commission those external advice where we need some proper specialist input in terms of particular cases. But yeah, that's in total, that one comes in around 16k.
Okay, thanks, Kerry. I had a couple of questions on this one from pre-briefing. In terms of statutory advertising, How are we proposing to reduce the budget for that if it's statutory? Have we just over allocated perhaps at the moment what we're spending? And the second question, which I'll get in as well, is in terms of the consultants spend, is that 5% of the overall consultancy budget that we've got, or is that a significant part of that consultancy budget to realise the saving? As you've outlined, as someone who sat on planning committee for quite a while, I've noted on a number of occasions where we've had to have external input to correctly make a determination on a planning application. And I suppose it would be a little bit concerning if it may lead us open to challenge or appeals if for example, we didn't have that professional advice. And I sort of wonder how much of a risk we feel that is in relation to this cut. Thank you.
Yeah, I think on the first point, it's more around available headroom that we've got within the budget lines. There is a requirement to advertise within press and whatever, and given circulation lists have reduced over time, there's just identified headroom in that particular budget line. So we're not increasing the risk around not doing a statutory duty in that respect. The professional fees budget line, that figure is not actually 5% of that particular budget line. It's more that 16k is 5% of the development management budget as a whole. So it's just a proportion then of that particular professional fees budget that has contributed to the overall 5%.
So in terms of the professional fees budget that we have, is there still a sufficient budget there, do you feel, to deal with the level of demand for that? Or do we feel like we might be making perhaps some more tougher decisions on some applications not to take that professional advice?
No, I don't think this proposal doesn't prevent us from getting that advice in the future. I think there is some headroom in that particular budget line. I think all I would say is that if we were to repeat and continue to trim that particular budget line, that would certainly increase the risk and perhaps leave us open that we're not getting that specialist advice where we need it.
Okay, thank you. I think perhaps again a little bit reassuring, but we're getting quite close to the line perhaps on how much we can manage in terms of those savings. Did I have another indication? Was it you, Tim, on this one? Yeah, Tim.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's on actually advertising in newspapers. As we all know, newspapers becoming a thing of the past now, and it must be a fee to actually put an application in. Is this passed on to the applicant, or is this something the council have to meet? And what is the actual cost for to advertise in the Evening Post or whatever?
I'd have to go back and find those figures. I wouldn't necessarily have that figure to mind, but I can certainly come back to you on that, Councillor. The cost of advertising isn't necessarily passed on direct to the applicant, but we do have budget lines that cover that requirement essentially. So we wouldn't necessarily pass that direct on to the applicant.
I think Nicola wants to come in, and then perhaps you can come back there.
I can't give you the exact fee, but you pay for the column length. So what we've been doing over the years, bearing in mind we've been trying to save budgets for many, many years, we've been trying to reduce what we say and even the font size to the minimum that is legal to try and save money. So that we've been doing that for many, many years to try and minimise the impact on our budget. But what I would ask members, and we've been doing it for many years unsuccessfully, is to lobby Welsh Government, because the amount of readers who are looking at notices and adverts in the newspapers is becoming less and less over the years. And we can advertise these via alternative means, for example, by social media, and we'd probably get a bigger reach in terms of making more people aware of these applications than we would by newspaper advertising. And we've always come up against a brick wall when we've raised that with Welsh Government, because they were trying to protect the media rather than local government. So an ask from us would be that if you can help us to get that message across every time we have a new minister, we make sure that sort of message is driven forward loud and clear. But the more of us that are saying that, the more likely we are to actually get traction, because it's not just planning that advertises notices in the press. the whole authority advertises things in the press because of statutory requirements. And when you add all that cost up, it's probably quite significant.
Thanks, Nick. I did sort of outline some of the background to members in pre-briefing. It's been an ongoing debate for a long time, this one, isn't it? And I think that's a good nudge to members to maybe pick up that baton. Tim, do you want to come back?
Yeah, thank you for that, Nicola. When I asked the question in pre-briefing, Sean did explain a bit about it because it was all new to me about that this Welsh Government had actually set this. But we had to put an ad in the paper going back last year about some land we were looking to rent off the council. And it cost us for the fortnight nearly £500. So it's not a cheap thing. And if you're only charging so much for the planning application, you know, it's costing the council now X amount to just put that ad in. So yeah, perhaps we all need to get on and lobby. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. I see I've got an indication from Carol.
Thanks, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Can hear you fine, Carol.
I've had to take my headphones off because I don't know, they're not working properly. We did a lot of work going back about 2018, 19 around the advertising budget while we're waiting to hopefully change Welsh Government's mind. So it's not started as you put it in a paper anymore. We did a lot of work around the different contracts we had with the newspapers, because one department would be paying more than another by not coming together and getting a contract for the whole council as opposed to each individual area. The idea was that we ensured that we had the best possible deal, because we did reduce it a lot at the time. So I'm just want to make sure that we are still having the best value for money that we can get by coming together and putting a bid for a whole council approach as opposed to each individual area paying different amounts for the same advertising. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol. Nicola, do you want to pick this one up?
Yeah, we obviously it's not in the council's interest for different departments to negotiate the individual contracts with their newspapers, and given the fact that there is only one that we use, we do work collectively to ensure we've got value for money for the public for all the notices that we put in the press.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Okay, I'll move on to ENVT, which is the trimming of professional fees budget line. Another one for Kerry. Along similar lines, I think.
Yeah, it is, Chair. It's this one relates to the policy, particularly the LDP team, and this is not the first time that we've perhaps raided this particular pot. So again, members will be aware that obviously the LDP is supported by quite an extensive evidence base. You know, sometimes we don't have that expertise in house to deliver those studies. So quite often we quite often commission bespoke studies that help that evidence base. So this particular proposal does reduce a little bit further the team's ability to commission those studies. So a spin-off of this particular proposal, it does perhaps increase the pressure in-house in terms of the team, which are already stretched in terms of producing the RLDP work programme. So again, this doesn't come out with without potential implications if it goes forward. Like a Chair.
Thanks, Kerry. I had one brief question on this, and obviously in relation to the LDP, it's this kind of cycle to it, isn't it? And I know we've previously put aside some money in reserves to deal with like peaks of work with the LDP, and I just wondered if this is something that perhaps we had some capacity to draw on reserves to deal with if there was an absolute necessity, and I'd be curious to understand that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We do have an LDP reserve that is quite often used for such issues, but of course that LDP reserve needs to cover the entire process. That includes any examination in public where we have to incur costs in terms of any inspector that is appointed or inspectors, as we experienced last time. So yeah, it's there is a spend profile associated with that reserve, and indeed any reserve that we have, and quite often we need to just keep track of that because we need to plan for the entire work program, not just the evidence-based elements.
Okay, Thank you. I can't see any other indications from members on this particular one. So I'll move on to ENVU. Again, with Kerry, this is in relation to countryside, and there's a few items. Statutory orders, fees, advertising budget, and other services budget line. So over to you on this one, Kerry.
Yeah, it's again, we've tried to think a bit differently this time with the countryside budget, because in previous years, members will be aware that we've raided the public rights of way maintenance budget, which is perhaps an obvious place to look, but there's only so far you can trim that particular budget, given the extensive network that the team have got to maintain. So we've tried to think a little bit differently this time. We're looking to increase an element of fees in terms of our statutory orders. Again, a reduction in the advertising budget, which similarly to planning, there is a little bit of headroom for the same reasons. And we have identified the other services budget. Now, the other services budget is a little bit miscellaneous in the sense that it can be used for a number of things. What we've done in the past, in recent years, is that we've members will be aware that for example, we receive NRW grant monies to look after the Wales Coast Path. That only goes so far, of course. I think generally speaking, we get around 15k from NRW grant for things like the Wales Coast Path. And the way that particular grant is structured is that NRW provides 75% with a 25% contribution from the council. So we use these type of budgets to meet our sort of end of the bargain, if you like. So it does ultimately potentially reduce our ability to maintain those issues, maintain those structures along the Wales Coast Path, or indeed sort of other areas of the network. But again, a spin-off of this is that we will need to be perhaps a little bit more creative in terms of what pots that we look to dip into it and get grant monies, and there are a few around, so it's potentially manageable, and certainly a preference this year than to look again at the public rights of way maintenance budget.
Thanks, Kerry. I had an indication on this one from Councillor Rob Wood. Rob.
Thanks, Kerry. I mean, to say it can't get any worse than it already is, the coastal path. I mean, it's not a path, it's just a cut through the town now, isn't it? I mean, the maintenance is non-existent, and we've got that monstrosity of a barrier down by the quays, which, to be honest, after you saying that we're going to cut what little money we've got, and it is a small amount of money, and to leave it in that state, you'll be leaving a lot of people disappointed, especially men's health walking groups that like to use these paths, when they're maintained and looked after. They're very useful and very good for men's health. I've been on the walks myself with them. And to see that it's just a dump of concrete on the centre of a path where there could be gates, which this budget line will directly affect. I mean, it's awful, isn't it? It's not something we can say, visit the dramatic heart of Port Talbot and the coastal path, because the coastal path is virtually non-existent, and the council has done its best to make sure that it never reopens with that barricade that's down there. Thanks.
Thanks, Rob. I'll just add an observation before I go to officers. I see Nicola wants to come back on this particular item. It did strike me really when we were sort of mulling this over in pre-briefing around the coastal path that in a sense it's a little odd that it's coming out of your directorate's budget. And I think, Rob sort of touched on the dramatic heart of Wales, perhaps tourism objectives we've got. And this is a key piece of our tourism infrastructure in the county, actually. It's a nationally recognised visitor attraction, isn't it? The Wales Coastal Path. And maybe you alluded to it, Kerry, when you were talking about other funding pots and grants and things to look at it, but it feels like something perhaps another directorate may be able to chip in. Given it's actually a relatively modest amount of money, and we've prioritised tourism and visitor attractions and facilities, it does feel like a little bit of cross-directorate work in here may be able to plug some gaps. So I just kind of wanted to make that observation before I bring Nicola in to answer. Nicola.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. What I would say in relation to the coastal path, where we've got that concrete barrier, that is for health and safety reasons, because we've got subsidence problems in that area, which we've tried to deal with in the past. It's where groundwater is effectively washing away the material beneath the path, and the path as a consequence is sinking. And we have, as I say, tried to repair it in the past, and it just recurs and recurs. It's because of the groundwater in that area, and because it's and immediately next to a tidal river. There is probably no way of us dealing with it apart from a big capital project that may well be costing, significant sums of money that we don't have. So we diverted the coastal path, so it is still there. It's just diverting into the energy park, and obviously it's not as attractive a route, but it is a relatively minor deviation from the previous route, and we've done it not because we wanted to and we wanted to pull people away from the original line of that route. It's for health and safety reasons, and because we do not have the capital to deal with a significant sort of civil engineering project in that area. In terms of the budget, I appreciate that we've got a new head of tourism leisure in place, culture, and I can't remember the rest of his title. It's very long, isn't it? I'm not necessarily sure he will thank us for passing that responsibility on to him, because whilst he's taking responsibility for those areas, a budget has not necessarily been transferred with that responsibility. So it's still a council problem, whether it rests in the Environment Directorate or whether it rests in our Educational Directorate. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Nicola, and I appreciate your last point. I think it's more around us consistently applying our priorities, and I think if it's a footnote in Kerry's budget, it's a bigger priority for Chris and others to look at those elements, and I think that's perhaps the point I was making. And maybe the other thing I'd say is minor deviation from the route might be stretching it a little bit there. It was on the coast and now it's not, so it is perhaps a little more than a minor deviation, but yeah, okay, take your point. Were there any other questions on this line? Oh, sorry, Kerry, of course.
Yeah, no, just to add to what Nick has said, it's probably worth flagging that our countryside team are currently liaising with Welsh Government, who are now the landowner in that area, and also NRW. I mean, Nick is right. We have, over a number of years, used that grant money to try and address this issue, but it's the tidal flow that is affecting and undermining the path that is causing the subsequence and effectively the sinkholes. So unless a big scheme, as Nick said, comes along and is designed to solve the problem once and for all, there will be a continued need every 2 to 3 years to spend the same amount of money just to resolve the problem on a temporary basis. So officers are liaising currently with Welsh Government and NRW to try and see whether there is a solution, a permanent solution to the issue.
Okay, thank you very much. I can see, sorry, Councillor Ros Davis has indicated on this one. Do you want to come in, Ros?
Yes, it's regarding rights of way in general, that they're not cut anyway because a lack of staff. So I was wondering if it was possible, James, for you to be able to have the probation service to be able to cut back in these areas.
Thanks, Ros. I don't want to put James on the spot there, but
yeah, it's conversations we can have, Councillor, with Kerry and the team. Obviously, we have only got the one team in at any one time at the moment. That's one vehicle, which obviously we provide. So there'd be some difficulties around that, but that's definitely some conversations we can have internally.
Thank you, James. Is that okay, Ros?
Yes, well, the rights of way paths are closing themselves because you can't get through them anyway. I won't say anymore.
Okay, thank you. So the next item is ENVV, and this is a few more trimmings of some budget lines from Kerry. Kerry?
Yeah. This is specifically the biodiversity side of things. This 14.5k in total is proposed to be achieved via sort of an increased income generation target, which we feel can be achieved. And also a reduction in again a general expenditure budget, which is quite often used just for equipment and sort of things that are needed to conduct sort of various tasks out and about in terms of the countryside and various wildlife corridors. So it's It's a fairly modest proposal, but again, does have potential implications in terms of ultimately staff not necessarily having the equipment that they need to do the jobs on the day-to-day. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. When we looked at this one in pre-briefing, I think the mention of undermined ability to work safely was perhaps a little bit alarming. I suppose you've said continued cuts, so that's probably something that's not an immediate concern. But I just assume this budget is paying for some of that specialist equipment, PPE, safety boots, and those sorts of things. Is that correct?
Yeah, again, as I say, this is not something that we've cut previously, and certainly wouldn't be something that we want to cut on year, because otherwise you would ultimately result in potential sort of health and safety issues for staff, and we certainly wouldn't want to go down that route.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on this item, members? Okay, we'll move on to ENVW, and again, it's Kerry, but this time in relation to building controls and building regulations.
Yeah, this is the last one from me, and yeah, this is the Building Control Regulation Service, and this proposal is in the main to be delivered or proposed to be delivered through a removal of the out of hours dangerous structure service. Again, it does have potential implications in terms of so the impact of withdrawing that, because quite often with a lot of these dangerous structures, they do tend to happen out of hours, and particularly through the night. The implications would be that we'd have to rely on services like the police and the fire service, who would attend in the first instance anyway. But rather than provide an out of hours service, officers would then attend the first working day thereafter. So, as I said, there's no statutory duty to provide this service. It is a discretionary power, and not all local authorities across Wales do provide an out of hours service. So we wouldn't be unique if we did push ahead with this particular proposal. The total proposal is then made up of a slight reduction in sort of the works in default budget, and that particular budget is generally adequate, because we can attempt normally to recover costs, but there are occasions where the owner of the building or the structure hasn't been established, so there's no then means of sort of recovering those costs. So a potential impact of this particular proposal that we'd have to then draw on any sort of central resilience budget by reducing the budget that the Building Control Service has available. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kerry. This one was, I suppose, a little bit alarming for me in terms of the dangerous structures cover. I think the other two budget lines a lot less concerning, and I suppose much as I appreciate that it might not be statutory, I think we've got to assess the risk, haven't we, as a council, and what our appetite to that is. And I mean, you've touched on the fact that these things, they can happen at any time, can't they? And I think this one might be one be interesting to see a little bit more information around the role we've played in these incidents and how that might impact that. Nicola, I don't know if you want to come in on this.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Chair, thankfully we don't get called out of hours very often. We do get called out in terms of our building control section because of their structural engineering expertise. If we withdraw these out-of-hour payments to the staff, that doesn't necessarily mean that the risk to the public is greater, because the police and the fire authority attend these places when there is a problem, and they will maintain a presence until we can be sure that that building is safe or the risk is mitigated. So just because we are removing out of hours payments, it doesn't necessarily mean that the risk to the public is worse, because there are other agencies who will be responding during the out of hours period. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicola. I think, again, as I said, maybe a little more information on this. Perhaps we can have a discussion outside of the scrutiny meeting might be helpful, perhaps that for members to understand what that risk may or may not be. Do you have anything else to add, Kerry?
Oh, nothing to add, Chair.
Any other members on this item? I can't see any there, so I'll move on to ENVAA, which is one for. Are you taking this one, Nicola? I've almost read Simon's name then, but I don't think he's here, is he? So this one is in relation to civic buildings. Nicola.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Simon's selfishly gone on holiday, so he's unable to make it today. We've marked his card. Yeah, this is a saving of 150,000 linked to the civic building. You'll be aware that we've reconfigured the use of the keys, where we have condensed the occupation of the floor plates down primarily to the middle floor, to try and work smarter going forward to ensure that we can maximise the use of the floor space for alternative purposes. And last week, the South Wales Trunk Road Agency moved into one of the top floor plates. So we are getting a rental income from them, which will continue. We didn't anticipate that they would move in so soon. So we've got additional income for this year as well as next year. And what we're also proposing to do is to try and digitise the offer at the front desk. So at the moment, we've got the concierge service that's sitting behind the desk as a glorified receptionist. Now, they are supposed to be the facility management resource for the building. So inspecting the building, making sure we haven't got any health and safety issues associated with it. So they should be roaming, not just at the Keys, but in other buildings, primarily this building and in Neath. They're not able to do that because they're stuck behind that desk. So we're looking at a digital solution to enable them to actually undertake the work that were originally intended to do. So a combination of those two will help us to deliver that £150,000 saving. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Nicola. My question on this one was, how achievable is that income in terms of letting the floor space? And obviously you've mentioned we've let some. In terms of achieving that £150,000 target, how much do we need to let out in order to hit that target?
Well, it depends. There's different sort of areas, believe it or not, on the different floor space, dependent because of the layout is slightly different on each of the floor plates. So, for example, the ground floor, where our highways colleagues used to occupy, is smaller than the upper floors because there are meeting rooms and things downstairs. So we won't be able to give you an exact figure per floor plate, but obviously we will try to negotiate with any interested parties to maximise the amount of income that we secure, and that will change over time, presumably based on overheads and costs. You know, with the South Wales Trunk Road Agency, we were able to offer the electric vehicle charging infrastructure that we have available in the Keys, that we've invested our money and the Welsh Government money into delivering over time. So as part of our deal with them, the money that they were going to spend on putting their own infrastructure in, they will use to deliver additional improvements in our building as well. So it's not just about the rent that we're getting from organisations such as that. It's about getting access to improved infrastructure for use by us all. But you know, we are fairly confident that we can achieve that target.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from members on this one? I can't see any there, so I'll move on to the last item on this list, which is ENVAB, relation to the metal box building. Again, over to you, Nicola.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This building at the moment, we've got a physical presence on site in terms of security arrangements. We want to move to an arrangement similar to what we have in other buildings, where we have a security company with cameras watching the building at all times, and as soon as they see something on the cameras, they send an emergency response straight away. So we won't be actually diluting the level of protection we have. We'll just be delivering it in an alternative way. We also hope over time, subject to us securing the capital that we need, we are proposing to subdivide the metal box to enable businesses to move into that building, and then in time, obviously the operational costs associated with that building will move from the council onto the businesses that are actually occupying that floor space. So over time our costs will decrease further. So that's the proposal, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nicola. I've got an indication from Councillor Rob Wood. Rob?
Yes, it's just a quick question. Wasn't there a serious metal theft at the metal box? Going back about a year ago, and security guards were threatened. I'm just thinking, without the guards there, if in the empty part or the bit that's not used, would we be at risk of that again? You know.
I don't know about the security guards being threatened or not, but there was a theft, I believe, of cabling whilst we were still whilst we were still sort of converting the property. So it wasn't fully occupied at the time. There weren't any tenants there. It was more of a construction site, and I think opportunist thieves removed some of the cabling that was on site.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. So that's the end of our list for the Environment Director. They've got one other item I need to pick up, which was pinged to us from the Education Scrutiny Committee. This is an item which potentially crosses over the committees. There's a little bit of disagreement whether it does or not, but it has been pinged to us. So I think it's right and proper that we take that item. And it is ELLLH, the home to school transport item, which is on page 40 of the Cabinet agenda from the 2nd of October, where we had the full list of budget items. And I know Councillor Bob Wolford has a question on that, and I'm just going to allow him to ask that question today, because I know he attempted to ask a question in Education Scrutiny. So we're just rounding off this item as well, if that's okay with members. Over to you, Bob.
Thank you, Chair. So I think the officer knows where this is coming from. The question is regarding the performance of the Edge consultants in the home to school transport. I asked a question in the Education Scrutiny, and the officer there directed that it was partly Dave's portfolio as well. So what I want to ask is, have we got a performance kind of report on how they're doing, and if not, when will the report be ready?
Thank you, Bob. Dave, do you want to pick this one up?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And perhaps by way of background for members of this scrutiny committee, as it was an education transformational programme, just back in 2022, the education colleagues identified that there were opportunities to improve performance and basically fundamentally transform and modernise the service to offer alternative travel solutions. So back in 2023, I was asked to facilitate the appointment of Edge consultants to help the council, as we didn't have sufficient capacity in-house to be able to deliver the programme on the scale that's required. So again, the review was an end-to-end review of passenger transport services. It affects both departments in that education colleagues need to establish eligibility and entitlement to transport. And then my transport team organise the transport on behalf of colleagues once the need is set. So Edge were appointed for a 3-year contract to deliver annual efficiencies of 1.269 million over the term of the contract, including £800,000 worth of cost avoidance. £800,000 of re-procurement and re-tendering of services, and then £150,000 of cost avoidance. Now, at the moment, we're in year 1. There are targeted savings of 350,000 with a net return of 52k. I'm currently in discussions with the consultant over some of the milestones and monitoring performance. I can't discuss the details of those at the moment, but what I can tell you is that this in-year saving, 23-24, has not been delivered. That means we are currently having those discussions and reviewing the 17 milestones, which are specific activity to drive those savings and transformational change. So I can't talk about the detail of that until I can establish that the savings are still deliverable, how they need to potentially be reprofiled. Now, that may be recoverable in year, but it could mean that the 500,000 that Dell have got in their plan for next year may need to change. So what I will need to do, Chair, is bring back a full report to scrutiny, possibly a joint scrutiny as it sort of sits over both education's portfolio and environment's portfolio. I hope to bring that back early in December.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to respond to that, Bob?
No, thank you, David. I know there's a lot of work going into it. So yeah, thanks for that. And hopefully we'll have that in early December. We know where we stand, yeah.
And from my point of view, I'd be happy to facilitate a joint scrutiny meeting to deal with it. I think we just need to have a discussion with, scrutiny section and others around exactly where all the governance and responsibility of this particular decision lies, so we can work out how best to approach that and who we need in the room when it is eventually discussed. But we'll work on that in the background and bring that back to members in due course. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our scrutiny on the budget items. It is just gone 4:10, so I think we should take a little break before we move on with the rest of the agenda items. We've got a couple of other things to deal with. So if we come back at 20 past and we reconvene, it gives people a chance to grab a drink, use the bathroom, etc. So we'll reconvene at 4:20 to finish off the rest of the items in today's meeting. And just want to thank anyone who needs to leave now at this stage. Mike, is that okay? Excellent. Right. Thank you, members. I'll see you at 4:20.